He sat there, tossing stones at the smooth surface of the pool, and then watched the ever-increasing ripples make gentle waves and patterns, until at last they reached the place where he sat. It was rather like his life, he thought. Everything went smoothly, and then from one little disturbance the whole world was turned upside down. He reached into his pocket, fishing out the very dirty and much-read letter. Opening it, he once more read the lines he knew by heart. Dear love, this is so hard for me to write, but I have to. I have become so deep in each other, and each moment we are apart is such a struggle for the both of us. Our love, we have always said, is a love that will last forever. But love, we both know that this is just not possible. We live in different worlds so many miles apart, and our lives will never be able to join, as we have talked about so many times. So I must end it now. He looked at the spot on the letter, and he swore there was a tear stain at that point. Was it hers, or was it his, he thought. And then he read on. We must part, before our love breaks us, before the pain of distance tears us asunder, before what we have becomes soiled and dirty. I know this will hurt you as much as it hurts me to write it. But my love, we need to have our lives. We need to be able to live. Please forgive me, my love, for it is the best for both of us. He crumbled the letter once more in his hand, and when he read the last lines, the best for both of us. How could she have said that? That letter had broken his heart, been the stone that had sent the ripples across the smooth surface of his life. The first ripple was that he could no longer function after receiving the letter. He tried day and night to speak to her, tried to write, emailed, even tried to phone her, but he got no reply. Work had become second place, and soon he was in trouble there. Long nights without sleep, long days without a reason to live left him unable to do anything. It was not long before he lost his job, and with that the second ripple appeared. He had no reasons to stay where he was, and created a mad plan to go and see her, confront her, and ask her to tell him face to face that she no longer cared. He had packed and drawn out all the money he'd left in the bank. After all, without her, what else was there in his life? He had left all he had and boarded a plane. Ripple on ripple spread as his friends were left wondering, and his family just couldn't understand. He had travelled for many hours until he'd found himself in a strange country, at a strange location, and not knowing what he could do next. In all the rush, and with his mind not being able to function correctly, he'd not even checked on how he could ever find her. The plane ticket fell out the envelope as he tried to put the letter away, and along with it, a bus ticket. His heart had been very heavy, but he knew what he had to do. After he checked all the possible connections, he found himself on a bus heading deep into the centre of the country. He remembered how his heart had seemed to sing to the sound of the wheels. I'm coming, I'm coming. He tried once again to call her from the bus station, but again there was no reply. He held the bus ticket in his hand, remembering the pain of each mile, the wanting and the needing. His heart had gone on a roller coaster of emotions, the fear of rejection, the exception of finally meeting her, the worry of what she would say, and then the hope of that they would be together. The journey had been lost in time, and he'd no idea how long it lasted and where it had gone. He just wanted to be there, with her. It had been a hot and hazy day when he'd finally arrived at the small town where she lived. Sweat had been running down his face, perhaps from the heat, perhaps with the nerves and sudden realization of what he'd done. What would she say? What would he say? He could not just turn up on her doorstep and then that's just what he'd done. He found a cheap place to stay and washed the trip out of his body, and then slept the first sleep he'd managed in many days. Unable to put things off any longer, as the first tips of the sun sunk in the western sky, he found himself outside the door to her house. Twice he'd gone to knock on the door, and twice he'd turned and walked away. Finally he'd gone, walked those last few heart-wrenching steps to her door, and slowly he'd knocked. almost in slow motion, his hand rising and falling, the sound echoing to the beat of his heart. He skipped another stone over the water and watched more ripples appear, just like as she had spread so many ripples through his heart. He'd waited there. The whole world seemed to have stood still, waited and waited. But nobody answered. Once more he knocked, even louder, in desperation, again and again. Nobody answered the door. Nobody came to the cry from his heart. He gazed over the rippling water, remembering his sheer feeling of despair at that moment. His whole body seemed to turn to water. He'd felt himself falling to the floor. He woke up in hospital, or a bed of what he thought must be a hospital, with crisp white sheets and a smell that only hospitals seem to have. He slowly looked around the room, his eyes clearing until they rested on a face looking deep into his eyes. He gasped, almost fainting once more, as she was there, her hand holding his, and a look of such love in her eyes you knew that all of the pain had been worthwhile. He had at that time not noticed how pale and drawn she'd been, or the fact that she was in a wheelchair. He tried to talk, tried to tell her how much he loved her, tried until the room began to whirl with the effort, but no words had come. His heart had been beating so fast the monitor alarm had sounded, and she had sat there with tears in her eyes and a look of such love as their hand was engulfed until the wings of night took him away. In the days after that, he found out just why she had written to him. She was dying. It was all to do with some illness with a name he couldn't have managed to pronounce. She had not wanted him to know, to worry, to do anything silly like travel to see her. So that is why she'd written to him. He'd spent the next days with her, and all that he'd ever wanted to tell her he had, and she told him the same. Theirs had been two hearts finally joined as one, but with every passing day she'd gotten worse, until what must have been only a few days ago she finally lost the battle and left him. He knew it was only a matter of time, and soon they'd be together again, some day, very soon. The sunlight glittered on the water and reflected on a single gold band that was on his finger. She'd left him, but not before the hospital chaplain had pronounced them man and wife. He looked once more at the widening ripples, which for a moment seemed to increase in size before settling once more to the mirror-smooth surface of the lake. Everything was quiet, and he was with her once more.